Good morning. Today we will be discovering completing the square. So I'm going to go through an example here, and then I'm actually going to do another example where I actually just write it out. So first, let's say we had 4x squared plus 5x minus 20 equals 0. So that's the equation that we started with, and we want to complete the square on it. Alright, so to complete the square, the first thing I want to do is get my c value. Remember, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 is the form that we're in. So what I want to do here is just get rid of the c from the left-hand side of the equal sign. So I'm going to add 20 to both sides of the equal sign. And after I do that, I'm going to get 4x squared plus 5x equals 20. The next thing I want to do is get rid of the a in ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. I want to get rid of the a term away from the x squared. So I'm going to go ahead and divide each term by a. A ends up being 4 in this case, so I'm going to divide everything by 4. And that's where I get the x squared plus 5/4 x equals 5. And that 5/4, I just left it as a fraction. I do not want to change that into a decimal. And 4 goes into 20 exactly 5 times, so that's where I get the 5. So go ahead and take a minute to look that over. If it's not clear what I've done so far, maybe go ahead and watch it again. Alright. Now, remember we've got the ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. That was our original. And in that case, b was 5. Our original equation, b was 5. But we've transformed it. So it is now 5/4. B is now a new b, and it is 5/4. Alright. So over on the right is some side work. So we're going to look at that in conjunction with the left-hand side, which is the actual work of getting the completing of the square. You have to do some side work. So you don't want to get them mixed together. You've got to be very, very, very clear on how you do it. You don't want to just try to jam it all in. I always put a little line in between so that I can say side work over here and actual work over here. So I've got my x squared plus 5/4 x equals 5. That's what we got from the last step that we'd done. Now I'm going to jump over and do some side work. Our new b is 5/4. I know our original b was 5, but we had to divide by a, which was 4, and we got a new b of 5/4. So the first thing you have to do with your new b is divide it by 2. You always divide it by 2. So I've got here 5/4 times 1/2. Multiplying by 1/2 is the same as dividing by 2. So we're going to multiply across. 5 times 1 is 5. 4 times 2 is 8. And I get 5/8. The next thing you have to do to complete the square is you have to square 5/8. So we're going to take our 5/8, we divided it by 2, and then we're going to square it. So 5/8 squared is 5 squared over 8 squared. So 5/8 squared, we're going to take our numerator and square it, and our denominator and square it. So I'm squaring both. 5 squared is 25, and 8 squared is 64. Okay? So I've got my new b converted into 25 over 64. So what I'm doing with that number is I'm going to make that my new c. I know it seems a little confusing at this point, but if you do it enough times, it will make sense. So I found my 25 over 64. I'm going to plug it back in by adding it to both sides of the equal sign. Okay, so I've got x squared plus 5/4 x plus 25/64. That 25/64 is what we found over here in our side work. So I added it to the left-hand side of the equal sign. Equals 5. This is just our original equation. Equals 5 plus 25 over 64. So I plugged that back in as well. So I plugged it into both the left and right-hand side. I'm just adding it. That's it. You always want to add it. All right. So now we've got a new equation here. We just need to simplify it. Okay. Okay, so I've got x squared plus 5/4 x plus 25 over 64. I'm not going to do anything with the left-hand side, but the right-hand side I did need to simplify. So 5 plus 25 over 64. So this is some more side work here. 5 plus 25 over 64. Well, there's 320 64s. 320 over 64 is equal to 5. So I just took 64, that's the denominator that I needed to have in common, times 5, and got 320. So 320 over 64 equals 5, plus 25 over 64, they have a common denominator, so now I can add the numerators. 320 plus 25 equals 345. So I have 345 over 64 is equal to this number here. So now I've got my new equation, x squared plus 5/4 x plus 25 over 64 equals 345 over 64. Now we want to factor, but you don't actually have to walk all the way through the factoring steps. So just note that when we divided up here, we divided by 2. Sorry, let me get it. There we go. So we divided by 2, and we got 5/8. 5/8 is a special number. We always want to save that right before we square it. We want to save that number. That number is going to come in real handy. So when we're factoring, 5/8 is going to come in really handy. It is a special number that we are going to use. So right before you square it, up in the side work, right before you square it, that 5/8 you want to save it. Okay? All right. So we're looking now at factoring x squared, there we go, plus 5/4 x plus 25 over 64, and it factors into x plus 5/8 squared. That 5/8, notice that 5/8 just gets plugged right in when we factor, so we don't even have to do the box method or the AC method or some other way of factoring. We don't have to worry about factoring it traditionally. We just have that special number that gets plugged in. It's a plus sign because coming back up here, this is a plus sign. So you look at the number right after the x squared. If it's a positive, then when we factor, it'll be a positive here. If this was x squared minus 5/4, then it would be x minus 5/8. So that's how you know whether that's a plus or a minus. Okay, and then squared equals 345 over 64. Okay, so hopefully this is making sense. This was just the right-hand side of the equal sign. We didn't mess with it. We were just factoring the left-hand side. We have now completed the square, and now we can solve the problem. So this is all we have to do to complete the square. We completed the square. We made it a square for x, which is really nice. So now to solve, we just have to square root both sides of the equal sign. Whenever you square root a square, you end up with an absolute value. Instead of writing absolute value square root, we just write plus or minus. So that just forces us to have the absolute value solutions. So plus or minus the square root of 345 over 64 on the right-hand side. The left-hand side, we just plug in a square root. Okay? So now we have a square root on both sides of the equal sign. A square root and a square cancel each other out. So you're just left with what's inside of the parentheses. So here we have x plus 5/8 equals plus or minus the square root of 345 over the square root of 64. And the square root of 64 is 8. So I simplified that down. And then I'm going to subtract my 5/8 from both sides of the equal sign to get x by itself. And we have x equals negative 5/8 plus or minus the square root of 345 over 8. Notice both of these terms have the same common denominator. So we can actually combine them. And our end answer can be written x equals negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 345 all over 8. And that might trigger some memories of the quadratic formula. We actually ended up with an answer that looks just like if we had done the quadratic formula. And we could have done the quadratic formula on this problem, but there are problems out there that completing the square is going to always be a little bit easier. So that's why I wanted to show you complete the square. And when you get to Algebra 2, you will be thankful that you've seen it and that you've gotten a chance to give it a shot. So, all right, let's go ahead and look at this next problem here. I haven't solved it out yet, so I was going to actually do it by hand in the video. So, go ahead and if you would like, pause the video and try this problem on your own. So go ahead and try this on your own. You may have to go back and watch the video again and really get all of the steps written down, but I wanted to give you a chance to try it out on your own. So go ahead and do that, and then when you're done, come back and I will show you how to do it step by step. So, all right, here we go. So I've made this problem a little bit easier. You might notice there's no a. A is just 1. So that's kind of nice. I still have a lot of work to do though. The first thing I always want to do is get rid of c. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides to get c to the other side of the equal sign. Now I have x squared minus 4x equals negative 3. The next thing I would want to do is divide by a. Since a is 1, dividing by 1 won't change anything, so I don't have to do that step. And then the next thing is to do some side work. So side work, I always like to identify that I'm doing some side work, so I always like to put it down there. So I'll just say side work here. I'm going to take my b, which dividing it by a left us with negative 4. So our new b is the same as our old b, and that makes this problem a little bit easier, of course. So I'm going to divide by 2, which is the same as multiplying by 1/2. They both mean the same thing, so dividing by 2, so b equals negative 4 divided by 2. So my new b is now negative 2, and then I need to square that. So negative 2 squared, and negative 2 squared is negative 2 times negative 2, which is a positive 4. Remember this number, this negative 2, right before we square it, this number here is special. So this is a special number. So we don't want to forget that. That is a special number. Okay. So what we want to do is take this 4 and we're going to add it to both sides of the equal sign. So we're going to add 4 to both sides of the equal sign, and we're going to get x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals Negative 3 plus 4 is 1. So far so good, hopefully. All right. And then we can complete the square, which is just factoring this, but when you factor this, you don't have to go through all the steps. You just do a parentheses, x, and then take your special number, which is a negative 2, so minus 2 squared equals 1. And we have completed the square. Now we're going to square root both sides, and we get x minus 2 equals the square root plus or minus the square root of 1. Remember the plus or minus, and the square root of 1 is 1. So we just get plus or minus 1. Add 2 to both sides to get x by itself. And x equals positive 1 plus 2 is 3, or negative 1 plus 2 is 1. So we get 2 answers, as we should. And if you use the quadratic formula, you would get the same thing. X equals 3 or 1. So x is either 3 or it is 1. And we are done. So that is complete the square. I'm going to do another complete the square video. Hopefully it'll all come together nicely. So go ahead and watch the other video as well. It'll be on the next assignment. So there is an assignment attached with this lesson. So go ahead and give it a shot. And let me know if you have any questions. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. And see you all later.